The founders of our country were no fans of democracy. That's why people get upset when you say democracy instead of republic. Some people do. People of a certain breed, you know who they are, get upset. Now, the reality is that the Greeks used the word democracy, the Romans used the word republic. There were slight variations of them, but they were essentially the same thing. But, we're a republic, we're not a democracy. Well, we're a republic with democratic components. It's complicated. It's language. The early church fought for years over how to describe the Trinity. And they ultimately settled on a Greek word that essentially, and I forget the word now that I'm talking about it, but essentially is one person in a Greek play, would wear multiple masks, and it was the same body, but it was three different persons on stage, and they used that word. And the reason they used that word is because the Romans had a word similar to it, and they had to find something that could be translated across languages. They had to be. Was it persona? Was the Greek? I can't remember now. Here I'm trying to grab for it and look for it. And in any event, you get the point. The Greeks and the Romans had different words that meant similar things, if not exact things. And so we scream and complain now in conservative circles. It's the most frustrating thing to me, honestly, because it has become a pet peeve. People who just yell when you say we've got to defend our democracy. We're a republic. We're a republic. I mean, go back and watch Price is Right, old person. You know what I'm talking about, and the fact that you're a nitpicks. Well, there's a word that rhymes with that. But our founders didn't like democracy as constructed by the Greeks, the direct democracy. They decided to go with the Roman Republican style, where individuals gave representatives the power to choose for them instead of the Greek direct democracy. The Romans' version was a representative democracy, where the Roman citizens would elect people to go represent them in the Roman Senate. The Greeks, in Athens at least, in the early days of democracy, it was all the people showed up and considered things. And that's what the founders didn't like. They didn't like mob rule. They didn't like rule by the majority. They did not like the mob being able to bully and badger people into getting their way. So they set up a government that had three branches. Ironically, the least powerful was the third. It is not accurate to say that they just put them three co-equal branches. They put the most preeminent, prominent, powerful branch first, giving it the power of the purse. That would be the people. The chief executive was a lesser role, supposed to be, and then the judiciary, the most minor. They were in ranked order. They certainly had checks and balances between them to control each other's sphere of influence over time that has merged and moved and morphed. Now the president is arguably the most powerful branch, in large part because the first branch of government has ceded all control to the second branch. And the reason the third branch has gotten as powerful as it is that the first two branches like the idea of being able to blame the unelected judges for decisions. So they have allowed the third branch to become as powerful as it is. It's an abdication of the first two roles. But all of this is still better than having the mob, than having the mob control things. In Britain, for the longest time, up until the late 20th century, whatever Parliament passed was law. If a majority passed it, it was law. For the longest time, the Crown had a veto, but it is now rarely exercised unless Parliament itself decides to get the monarch to exercise it. Queen Elizabeth vetoed legislation last year, as a matter of fact, but it was done so at the behest of Parliament when they found an error in the legislation. She didn't do it herself. We in this country have a series of checks and balances that mitigate the mob, and yet the left in particular, but also some on the right, would much prefer mob rule these days. They would much prefer that their side be completely in charge because they see the other side as the enemy. Maxine Waters risks Derek Chauvin getting out of jail with her comments. The judge in Minnesota did not declare a mistrial, but said it may give grounds on appeal. Maxine Waters went and essentially said they need to burn the city down if they don't get their way. If Black Lives Matter does not get its way, they need to burn the city down. She denied it later, but she said it. She said it. It was caught on film. Nancy Pelosi has defended her. The mob wants justice, and only their preferred outcome will be what they consider. I want to be upfront and honest with you. I think Derek Chauvin should go to prison. I do not necessarily think he murdered George Floyd. He was a police officer acting in the line of duty. I do think he used excessive force. Having his knee on that man's neck for almost 9 minutes, clearly after George Floyd had stopped struggling, refused to allow a paramedic to examine him, refused to take his knee off of him, refused to allow others to see him. When the ambulance arrived, as he was unresponsive, still refused to get his knee off George Floyd's neck. I think that Derek Chauvin did bad, and I think he will be punished, and I think he should be punished. I don't necessarily think it's murder, in large part because he was a police officer on the job. George Floyd did have a history that police officers did take into account, and he did have behavior then and there on the scene that necessitated him being restrained like that, at least initially. But after about the 5th minute, it clearly was inexcusable, and something should happen. But the idea that the mob should stand ready to burn down the city of Minneapolis if the mob does not get its way. The idea that the mayor of the governor of Illinois has had to call out the National Guard to prevent riots. The idea that Maxine Waters should be able to get a pass on saying burn down the city if they don't get their way. The idea that Marjorie Taylor Greene should be considered possibly ousted from Congress because she didn't support the Electoral College vote and other things that caused the Democrats to want to boot her out of Congress, but give Maxine Waters a pass, is a bit too much for me. I'm not a fan of Marjorie Taylor Greene, nor am I of Maxine Waters. I think they're about the same person. But the idea that the Democrats would give Waters a pass and condemn Marjorie Taylor Greene for the things she does is staggeringly hypocritical. More importantly, the media has so internalized January 6th, which I myself think was a terrible day. Yes, there were peaceful protesters, but yes, you cannot deny that there were also malicious people who intended to harm members of Congress. And no, it wasn't Antifa. I apologize for shaking you out of your mythology. It was not Antifa. It was people who supported the president of the United States, then Donald J. Trump. They were in the minority, but they did try to cause harm. They did try to storm through a door and grab members of Congress. They did erect a noose. But you know what? They didn't burn down Washington, D.C. They went to Congress, and the fact that the media was saying, oh, January 6th, that is terrible, terrible, January 6th, awful. We can't have any, this was an affront to our democracy. No, they're on the streets of Minneapolis. There's your affront to democracy. On the streets of Portland, Oregon, there's your affront to democracy. On the streets of Chicago, Illinois, there's your affront to democracy. On the streets of Washington, D.C. and New York City, in Baltimore, Maryland, and around the country, the mob wanting to burn down their cities if a jury doesn't give them what they want. There is your affront to democracy. And the fact that you're so fixated on January 6th, you can't even call this out, is why nobody trusts you. When the mob decides it's going to burn down the city if they don't get their way, the American media should be standing up against the mob. Instead, they're too busy fluffing them. Listen to this from Maxine Waters, or not from Maxine Waters, from Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Ignore. That's what happened in Nazi Germany, Lindsay. The supposedly benign, more softer Nazism at the beginning ultimately led to the Holocaust. And so if you don't knock down the outrageous, racist, most really evil beliefs of Republicans and anyone like this, then we will live to repeat the discrimination and persecution of minorities or people who are deemed other in the future. And that's what Never Again is all about. And, I'm very careful about not making comparisons, but when you when you see this racism and the ownership of that only one race, only one people are acceptable, that's when you start to go down a very dark path.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz comparing Republicans to Nazis and tying them to the Holocaust. Racist, all of them, Racists. This is what the Democrats think of the Republicans. Republicans think no better of the Democrats. Both sides see each other as the enemy. Only one side is in the streets of major American cities trying to burn it down. There is only one side in this country that when it doesn't get its way, small businesses suffer because they turn to ash and rubble. There's only one side in this country when they don't get their way, burns down American cities, smashes cop cars, beats people up in the streets. The media is so fixated on the supposed rise of white supremacy in this country that they refuse to even cover this. There is a jury deliberating facts. I suspect they will conclude that Derek Chauvin should go to jail for what he did. If they do not, cities will burn. Lives will be destroyed, if not taken. Businesses certainly will be destroyed and turned to rubble. And the American media wants to give a pass to all of it. It's understandable anger, you see. Either the system works or it doesn't. And what the media has been doing over the last decade is been complicit with people like Barack Obama and others to say that the system doesn't work. To some degree, I think some of these people would love it if there were violent riots that turned into mass chaos around this country so they could wash their hands of it and say, well, see, time to start over with our socialist paradise. Got to get rid of the Constitution. But, there are people on the right who want the same thing, who've decided the Constitution doesn't work. I hear this on the right as much as I hear on the left these days. A bunch of people who've decided that the Constitution no longer works and we need to start over again and we need to be the ones to decide the common good. No. Trust the American people, not the ones rioting in the streets, not the ones storming the Capitol on January 6th. The vast array of American people who show up every day at their job without complaint and do their job and go home and want to live their lives and then show up on election day and vote. Trust those people. The fact that neither side wants to trust the American people because they might lose something they've decided is more sacred than the Republic. Their version of whatever the hell the common good is, whatever it is, and it changes on a daily basis, it changes culturally all the time. We are a broken people. We really are broken people. We all fall short of the glory of God. We're a broken people. But my goodness, the fact that you've got some contingent in this country justifying what happened on January 6th and pretending it was no big deal. And now you've got an even larger contingent of people on the side of the American press turning a blind eye to the fact that mobs may burn down America if a jury doesn't give them their way. Trust the jurors. They're the real Americans here. Trust the American people, not the mob. And the fact that any of you think that you should be able to impose your common good on others, you're not behaving a whole lot more different than those who are willing to burn down cities if they don't get their way. You're not trusting the American people. And these people in Minneapolis, in Portland, in Washington, D.C., in New York City, in Chicago, and every other major city should fundamentally be condemned for what they're doing. And the fact that the American media won't, while they're hyping up fear porn over the vaccine, is just another good reminder that nobody trusts the media. And perhaps we need some reboots in this country, but not at the constitutional system, but at the level of who do we listen to and who do we trust. And it should begin by not trusting mobs.